We've been watching the president's salute to America here on this July 4th. I want to bring in our panel to discuss what we have seen so far, starting with you, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. As you have been watching this, you know, in a vacuum, this has been pulled off so far pretty well. The president stuck to script, which is something he doesn't often do. But I think we have to underscore that this is an unusual display that we have seen.
Yeah, I can't remember in my lifetime ever seeing anything like this.
And these are the Blue Angels flying over. Until you were actually the spokesperson.
I was. For 5 years, I was with the Blue Angels, and I was wrong earlier when the previous Navy flyover. I didn't get a good look at it and thought that it was just a Blue Angel diamond. But this is them performing a braking maneuver where they all sort of split off into separate directions, and that smoke is actually wax that they inject into the engine exhaust. That creates that white smoke. Look, it's very unusual to see something like this, and I still go back to what I said before. I think I'm just troubled about the militaristic tone of this whole thing. First, we were treated to essentially 8th grade history. That was fairly sepia-toned and saccharine in its depth and context. In fact, it was lacking a lot of depth and context. And I heard nothing other than a pledge to put the American flag on Mars. I heard nothing in this speech about where this country should be going, what we should be working on, some of the problems we need to fix. And that's what we lean on a commander-in-chief and a president for, is to drive us forward. We are a very young country. We have the attention span of poodles. We like to look ahead, and we need a president and a leader that will help us do that. And I heard none of that in this speech. I could have gotten this off of watching Schoolhouse Rock, and I frankly didn't need all the militaristic displays of might. I think it's just, again, not who we are as a country.
What did you think, Ryan Lizza?
I mean, I think it's important to point out what he didn't say, right? He read the speech from the teleprompter, which he rarely does, and he didn't go off into a lot of traditional Trumpian, bizarre, frankly, tangents. Didn't do as much sort of attacking his enemies, just sort of normal stream of conscience Trump rants. I mean, that's a lot of the time that's what he does at his rallies and his speeches. So that didn't happen this time. It reminds me of a couple of other speeches where he read the whole thing and didn't do that. State of the Union, maybe the D-Day speech. And when he does stick to a speech, maybe just as a writer, I'm a little bit more alert to this. It reminds you that his speechwriters are not the best in the business. Other presidential speechwriting teams have been a whole lot better. George W. Bush had a great speechwriting team. If you read those speeches, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, these speeches are sort of a little low.
They're rudimentary.
They're very basic, and so sometimes it just seems like he's reading a Wikipedia page about historical events. On this date this happened. A lot of jokes on Twitter and elsewhere about just, it seems like a Schoolhouse Rock version of history, or a 7th or 8th grade or research report. But a little bit of credit for not going off on a lot of sort of lunatic tangents, which frankly does happen.
He didn't go off on any tangent.
There was a USA chant, which
there was.
That was sort of symbolic of a rally, but other than that, and I think the nostalgia of the speech, as you were saying, that had to do with the history lesson we all just sat through in that very rudimentary, as you said, way. I mean, that made it feel, like we were looking back and not forward, as you just said, and that felt a little off there.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't Beyonce singing the national anthem at the '04 Super Bowl. It wasn't Lin-Manuel Miranda at the White House in 2009 rapping Alexander Hamilton. But it was fine, Bree. It was a history lesson. Like everyone else said, it was like a Wikipedia entry. It almost felt at times like the president was sort of like, oh, wow, look at all these things that America has done. His whole pitch going back 3 years has been Make America Great Again. If you listen to that speech, turns out America was great the whole time. We did a lot of good things. We struggled through a lot of things as a country. But again, he stuck to script. Content-wise, it was fine. I agree with Admiral Kirby. I'm still not quite sure why he felt this holiday was the venue for it, but moving on.
Barbara Starr, you cover the Defense Department day in, day out. What was your perspective on what you saw here?
Well, I think I'm going to be a little bit of a divergent voice from everybody there tonight. Look, I mean, this was an event that was supposed to be, at minimum, feel good for the country on a holiday. But what strikes me the most, and I feel this way as a reporter covering the military about so much of it, of what we see here, is that service in the United States military over the decades, over the hundreds of years, is not a reality TV show. Right now, today, as we stand here, there are homeless veterans on the street. There are veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress, all the way dating back to their service in Vietnam. Suicide is at an all-time rate. Military families are struggling on salaries that could definitely be higher. Veterans are struggling for their benefits. Gold Star families, he good for the president that he mentioned them, but if you are a Gold Star family, if you have lost a spouse or a child or a relative in combat, you are a Gold Star family for the rest of your life, and that stays with you forever. Stuff that people probably don't want to get sad about on a holiday, but from the President of the United States, any president, we see this all the time. They use the military as a political backdrop. President Obama did it, both President Bushes did it. It is a rally call to the country for loyalty to the military, loyalty to national goals, and that's all fine. But I think many people in this country have really moved beyond just that. And the reason it's so important, and I think Admiral Kirby knows this better than anybody, today recruiting into the military of young Americans is very tough. They don't necessarily, in the great numbers that are needed, have that affinity necessarily, not all of them, some of them do, for public service. Many young people cannot qualify for military service because of their health. You got to make the military realistic to young people today, not a reality TV show and not a computer game.
Can I just add one thing? Barbara said that so well, and I think she's right that the military deserves a moment of recognition and celebration. The only thing I would add, though, is that if there are these military families that are out here that have needs, that need the recognition, that have lost loved ones, why wouldn't the money for this event be spent on TRICARE or on base housing or on other things that military families need, and not a moment to center a national holiday around the president? That would be my only criticism.
April Ryan?
That's true. Yeah, I tend to agree with everyone, but I'm going to take, like Barbara Starr, I'm going to take a little bit of a different take. I think at this moment, this president he needed a soaring moment, he needed a soaring speech, as his disapproval numbers are higher than his approval numbers as he's going against Joe Biden. Yes, he was focused, he wasn't distracted, but what I will say, as we went through that Schoolhouse Rock history lesson portion, I took notes. If you didn't know better, it sounds like everything was great, but when he talked about the Gold Star families, I thought about the Gold Star family, the Khan family. When he talked about the military, who I could not help but think about, late Senator John McCain, who was a POW. As he's saluting the military, I also watched him and heard him talk about women's suffrage, 100 years ago, how women weren't allowed to vote. But there are still calls for him to have free and fair elections, especially after this last midterm, where there were calls about and it's not just women, but just for minorities as well, issues of voter suppression. He talked about Dr. King. He talked about the Greensboro, the kids, February 1st in 1960, who sat in at that Woolworths counter and integrated that Woolworths counter, the Woolworths across the country actually, for sitting in because they were just hungry. And when he said that, I thought about the Exonerated Five. He's talking about these 18-year-old kids at that time in 1960. And I'm thinking about these kids who he took out a full-page ad for them to have the death penalty, and they were exonerated, and he still feels that they were guilty when they were exonerated through DNA. I also heard him invoke the name Harriet Tubman. Right. As Harriet Tubman's likeness on a $20 bill is in jeopardy in this administration. They're trying to delay it past 2028 when it should have been 2020. So if you didn't know better, and the list goes on, I could go on, but if you didn't know better, This president is trying to recreate his history before he celebrated the military. He needed this moment. If you didn't know better, if you didn't fact check and go back to what he said or done about certain issues, it would be a soaring speech. But for someone who covers him day in and day out and understands some of the issues, and I'm still even checking on when he said the ISIS caliphate is 100% gone. We have to check that one as well. There are a lot of things in this speech that it may have been Schoolhouse Rock Trump version, but nonetheless, we still have to fact check. And it was his attempt at a soaring moment for history.
I do want to get Phil Mudd's perspective on what we just saw. Phil?
Well, let's see. Let me be subtle here. At a professional level, 25 years in national security, I hated it. At a personal level, I hated it more. Let me tell you something. When we're in the midst of July 4th after 9/11, when I was at the CIA, I thought we were celebrating the defensive ideals, the right to live free and fair, the right to live according to those documents that our founding fathers established, the right of every person, every citizen in this country to pretend like they can be president, the right to have economic opportunity. I didn't realize we were fighting for the chance to pay for guns, for weapons. I did national security. I thought this was about ideals, and now we've made it about the military. That's not what the founding fathers gave us. They gave us the gift of ideals. At a personal level, excuse me, but now we have the Super Bowl is invaded by politics. Players are kneeling. The Women's World Cup is invaded by politics, a dispute about whether women go to the White House. We have a stupid dispute of politics this week about whether Nike puts a flag on a shoe. Can we actually have a day with hamburgers, hot dogs, and a few beers without a politician? Please, one day. And now we can't, because now we got politicians saying, let's celebrate guns and aircrafts and forget about the founding fathers who talked about being cautious with a standing military.
I just always wish that Phil Mudd would tell us what he really
Really
feels.
thinks.
What he feels.
All right, stand by, everyone. We have much more to talk about. We'll be right back.